Allan Aguirre with your Incorruptible 2 minute warning. Today is Friday this week, simply because I have a previous engagement in the morning. Yeah. Okay. Let me do this little thing over here in case somebody decides to show up and watch live with me this morning. First Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to wrap up the chapter. We don't have very much more to go. Let's try this again from yesterday, verse 9. Again, this chapter is called the way of love. We've discussed how Christianity has literally used this chapter to debunk or to use as an excuse on why they don't speak in tongues or prophesy or do any of the other spiritual gifts we affectionately call charismatica here at Chameleon Church. They literally believe, well, love is better than. That's not what it says. Literally. Yeah. So take that. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. That is absolutely, completely true. We just, we're not functioning. We're not functioning with all the information, with 100% of the information. We're assuming a lot of this stuff. But even though I know that to be true and I believe that, I also know that God is a good God and He's a good Father. He's not going to give us stone when we ask for bread or snake when we ask for fish. And He has provided for us everything we need in order to successfully and truly and correctly live our lives in this earth realm pleasing to Him. We just won't do it. So, and then when it comes to prophecy and when it comes to the supernatural and things of that nature, we know in part and we prophesy in part. I'm thinking Elijah probably had a better clue. Right, the further back you go, I think they had a little bit closer understanding to what was going on. Not partially because God was allowing Himself to be revealed, but also there was less communication issues. There was less noise, and men. I don't know. I think they just went for it more than than many of us do today. So we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. I believe that means when Messiah comes, the partial will pass away. I think as much as I believe the millennium reign is going to look like now, it's going to look like today, right? I mean, we're going to have cities and cars and people. There's literally going to be a group of people that are not going to like the idea of Jesus being here on earth, Satan being locked away, and Jesus being here on earth ruling from Jerusalem. There's a lot of people that are not going to like that. They're not going to like that at all. And there's going to be, sports and people going to their jobs, and it'll be, there's going to be some differences, like this seen in part. I think there'll be some supernatural stuff going on that will be lost to many, but to those of us that are actually, a part of Him, we'll have some downloads, some opening up of our spiritual eyes and ears. I want to. My goal I've always desired as a goal. I want to live during the millennium reign. Apparently, your life your life term is expanded, but not that. Here's why. I want to live during the millennium reign, or I want to experience the millennium reign for whatever amount of time, because I want to see Him come back. I want to see His return. I want to see this transition occur. But I also very well know what I would have to go through and aguantar, and I don't understand why I do that. Spanish is not like my first language. Aguantar is a Spanish word. I know what I'm going to have to endure in order to get to that place. Revelation says if you're supposed to be imprisoned, you'll be imprisoned. If you're supposed to die, you'll die during the tribulation, during this transition. But anyway, I'd love to see it. I want to see what it would. I want to see how it all plays out, how He comes, how He establishes Himself. How many people are just not gonna look at him and not know that it's him? Things like that. Little things like that. When I was a child, and here's again, this is really important because I don't think a lot of people in Christendom. I think a lot of people we know that a lot of Christianity is still drinking milk, and that was me putting it very politely. We know that they're still drinking milk, and they still function like children. They've never matured. They've never matured into spiritual maturity, which is why this is so important here. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Why is he throwing this in there when it comes to love? Well, because he's trying to make a point that in order to function with chapter 12 and 14, you can't be a child. You can't be double-minded. You can't be tossed to and fro. You literally have to be a functioning member of the body in order to be able to speak in tongues and prophesy and stuff like that. In love, through love. Verse 12, for now we see in a mirror dimly. Cross-reference Numbers 12:8, Job 36:26. And it's also suggested that he is referencing a cult, a cultish, people knew about this back then, where they used mirrors as divination. But then face to face. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. Right? So he's not making an excuse not to speak in tongues, not to prophesy, not to be involved with any of the stuff that's mysteries and knowledge and faith, and he's just saying, look, you have to be compassionate, you have to have love, you can't be rude. And then he explains the different forms of expressions of love: patience, kindness, not envy or boasting, not being arrogant, verse 4, or rude in verse 5. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, verse 7, right? So he's explaining the characteristics of love, and then he goes into verse 9, starts talking about charismatica again, and how you have to be mature to do it, and how we're working with partial information. We see in part, it's like we now see in the mirror dimly, but then face to face. We'll have clarity when he comes. Then it says in verse 13, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Christianity has decided this. This is how Christianity reads it. So now, chapter 12, chapter 13, and chapter 14, these three, but the greatest of these is chapter 13. Literally, that's how it's preached. That's how it's understood. That's how it's taught. And again, they're empowering themselves incorrectly, erroneously, in the area of why they don't have to be charismatic, why they don't have to be involved with spiritual gifts, why they don't have to actually obey chapters 12 and chapter 14 because of love.
The views and opinions expressed during our broadcasts are solely those of the broadcast producers, hosts, and/or guests, etc., and are not necessarily the views or opinions of the Travelog Network, its sponsors.
I love how they always make it one or the other. It's like they're not capable of balancing both. Grace, salvation, Torah, right? Love, the gifts. It's like one or the other for them. They can't. It's like they're not capable of going beyond that. And I believe them.
The views and opinions expressed during our broadcasts are solely those of the broadcast producers, hosts, and/or guests, etc., and are not necessarily the views or opinions of the Travelog Network, its sponsors, or affiliates.